on what he's building for the community. So I'd like to give you, for you to give you his attention. And yeah, round of applause, please. You can't do it because I got a beer.
Hey everyone. Yeah, thank you. My name is Jason Shavan. I am the guy who created Memo, and so here's what I'm going to talk about tonight. First, for people who don't know, or I'm going to talk a little about what Memo is and like how it works, and then talk a little bit about why Memo is built on chain, and then the second half I'll go into more recent events and talk about the upper turn increase from 220 bytes to like 100 kilobytes, which is a little bit of an increase. And then talk a little bit about unconfirmed transactions if there's time still.
Yeah.
All right, so what is Memo? Memo is a decentralized social network built on top of Bitcoin. It does not require any central server. So Memo.cash, the website, is sort of, can think of as a central server right now, but it's not required. The site can disappear completely and the network would live on the chain. Everything is written on chain. We don't just like write hashes of the tweets or of messages people post. The messages themselves are posted. So the entire activity of the network can be reproduced by any client. If you want to not use Memo.cache the site, you could run Memo locally on your own computer. We don't have any client available, but there's libraries for multiple different languages that you can use, and you can have full control of your key, and basically have full control of your on-chain identity. The data, as well as being under your control, also has the same properties that the data on the blockchain has because it's on chain. So as long as the blockchain still exists, your data still exists. So if Memo.cache, the site, disappears, your data will still be on there. You're not reliant on this like one business being around. And since it's built on chain, money is built right into the system. So it's really easy to tip people as kind of the first use case. So if somebody posts something on Memo you really like or whatever, you can send them money as part of like liking it, which is really cool. And I'll talk more about that later. And then recently we just implemented where you can send just money directly to someone with a message. So it's sort of like Venmo. And I'm sure there's been all other kind of cool money use cases. Somebody had like a betting service and a number of other things. So to dig in a little deeper into the technicals of Memo, like I said, it uses the blockchain as a database. All data is written on chain. So if you think of a Bitcoin transaction as like a check, you can think of the field on a check, the memo field, which is kind of how the name comes from, as like a place you can put any arbitrary information. So you could say what the check was for. So we basically hijacked that field and the Bitcoin transaction and started putting formatted data that represents certain actions. So you create a Bitcoin address and you give it a little bit of money. You post a check to yourself with the memo field saying the prefix M01 and then a name, and that's basically writing you're saying this address has this name associated with it. Then if you say M02, some other text, that's like writing a message. And then they would produce this post on Memo with that name. There's lots of other actions for, we can create polls and follow people and all kind of basic social networking actions. So now you know what Memo is. We just released the mobile app for Android, and it was built with React Native for people who are interested in that stuff. And React Native cross-compiles to both Android and iOS, so we should have an iOS app in the near future as well. So no more using the mobile browser. It works decently, but an app is preferred. And I think most notably there's push notifications, which is pretty cool. And now that we have a mobile app, we can start doing cool stuff like potentially storing keys on your phone or something like that. Not in the near future, but down the line. Okay, so why is Memo on-chain? Besides being just kind of cool and being like a techie thing. So let me talk a little about a story about a company called PadMapper, which some of you may be familiar with. PadMapper basically paid for Craigslist data and then put it on a map so you could see specifically like apartments that were for rent. And it had much better UI than Craigslist. And I used it a couple times and liked it a lot more. And I was really sad when it disappeared because basically Craigslist sued them and said, stop using our data, get your own data. And obviously if you're a user that posted your apartment on Craigslist, having it on PadMapper is, benefit to you. That's getting more visibility. So it's not in the user's best interest to not have the data replicated to PadMapper. It's just in Craigslist's best interest because they want to keep people on their site. So that's just like one example of how companies controlling your data does not represent your best interests. If you're someone who wants to post an apartment, you'd rather just post it onto the blockchain once and let any type of application that's going to show apartment listings to display your apartment listing, rather than having to go to apartments.com, Craigslist, Trulia, and a whole bunch of other services to try and get as much visibility for your apartment listing as possible. So Memo is kind of like the beginning of how that's possible on chain. And this isn't an apartment listing service, but Member App is another Memo implementation that added basically a Yelp type service to it, where you can post locations and comment on it. And so doing an apartment listing would not, be pretty feasible. Okay, so that was the first reason for doing things on chain. Second reason is basically a single identity. So right now, people probably have lots of different social networks that you're a part of. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., Reddit. And on a lot of these social networks, you develop a group of connections. And every time you join a new social network, you start out with no connections and have to rebuild from scratch. And most times you just don't even bother trying to rebuild your network. You just kind of start a new network. So if you put things on chain, if you use a single identity system that's built on chain, any new network you join, you can take your connections with you. And then on top of just the convenience of not having to build your network on all your social networks, this can extend to even more applications. So for instance, on Amazon, you look at Amazon reviews, and right now you just are like, oh, whatever they put on the top, I'll read those ones. But it would be much better if you could just be like, hey, what have my friends purchased recently? What are some of their reviews or people I trust? And so having a social network built into Amazon would be great. Or Netflix is another example. Knowing what movies your friends have seen and comments that they have on those are probably much more important to you than just random people on the internet. So having a single identity system that everything can plug into enables all this additional social networking features across all applications. I'm not going to talk about this one too much, but I think use monetization is an interesting topic. Basically right now, Facebook and Google and the social networks kind of just take out all the monetization from news, because people just post on here and people rarely even leave the site, and then Twitter just puts a promoted post next to it, and you never actually go to the Wall Street Journal and see their ads. So they're getting the most of the monetization. So using something like Memo and doing things on chain where money is built into it, and I'm sure Ryan will talk about this with Money Button, allows journalists and any other content publisher to directly monetize their content rather than relying on ads and and trying to put clickbait titles so that you have to click through the article to their site to see their ads, in these crazy schemes, while the Twitter is fighting to try to keep you on Twitter so they can show you their ads in this game that has to go on. Okay, so that was talking about Memo and kind of why it's on chain. So now I'm going to kind of talk about more, other topics. So the op return recently was increased to 99 kilobytes, 99.9-ish. It's basically 100 kilobytes minus the overhead of the transaction. So that's huge. Before it was 220 bytes, so that's a 400-fold increase, which is a pretty big deal. Last May, it was increased from 80 to 220, which is a big deal. So, and that was only a 4x increase. So, basically, the way Memo works right now, each post is only a single transaction. So you were limited originally by 80 bytes and now 220 bytes for how much data you can put into a post. And then, so it's kind of like Twitter in the fact that you can only have 200 something characters in a post. But we didn't do that because we were trying to be like Twitter. It just did that because it's convenient for doing transactions on chain. We had plans to in the future link multiple transactions together to do longer posts, but increasing the size of the op return just basically gave us that without that extra effort. So basically, this was previously possible, and we were doing it like this is an example of a poll that's on Memo, and this uses multiple transactions to put together. And there's things like Bitcoin files, Matter, Bookchain, and a couple other things that use multiple transactions to write larger quantities of data to the chain. So it wasn't impossible before, but now it's a lot easier and it's a lot cheaper. Because before, when you're doing multiple transactions, you have to pay for the overhead of every transaction, versus now you only pay for that overhead once, and it's way easier. And then on top of being cheaper and easier, it just signals future support for large amounts of data on chain. So as like an app developer, you can have confidence that fees will stay low, and that these types of apps will